The movie opens in a vast desert in Afghanistan. A military convoy moves slowly through the rough terrain. The road is surrounded by dry land, mountains, and open sky. Several U.S. Army Humvees drive together, carrying soldiers and equipment. Inside one of the Humvees sits Tony Stark, a wealthy businessman. He is relaxed and smiling, wearing sunglasses and casual clothes, completely different from the soldiers around him. He holds a small video camera and records himself while the vehicle bumps along the road. Tony speaks confidently into the camera, joking and acting casual. He introduces himself and mentions that he is traveling with the military. He seems amused by the situation, not worried at all about being in a war zone. The soldiers around him talk among themselves and joke as well. One soldier recognizes Tony and asks for an autograph. Tony happily signs it using a photo of himself. The convoy continues moving forward through the desert. Loud rock music begins to play from inside the vehicle, filling the scene with energy. Tony leans back comfortably, enjoying the ride as if he is on an adventure rather than a dangerous mission. Suddenly, everything changes. Without warning, an explosion erupts in front of the convoy. One of the military vehicles is destroyed. The music stops instantly. Chaos breaks out. Gunfire fills the air. Soldiers shout orders and grab their weapons. The convoy is under attack. Tony's expression changes from calm to fear. He stumbles out of the Humvee as bullets fly around him. Explosions go off nearby. Soldiers try to protect him while returning fire. Smoke, dust, and flames cover the area. Tony runs, confused and terrified. He has never experienced anything like this before. He trips and falls in the sand, trying to get back up as the battle continues around him. Nearby, a missile crashes into the ground in front of Tony. It does not explode immediately. Tony looks at it closely while lying on the ground. On the side of the missile, he sees the words, Stark Industries. Tony stares at the missile in shock. A moment later, the missile explodes. The blast throws Tony backward through the air. He crashes hard into the desert ground. Metal fragments pierce his chest. He lies motionless, badly injured, as the sounds of battle fade. The screen goes dark. The scene shifts to a bright, modern workshop filled with advanced machines and glowing screens. Tony Stark stands in the center, calmly working on a complex mechanical device. He adjusts tools with precision and confidence. A circular metal object is fixed in his chest, glowing softly. A computer-generated female voice speaks to him. Tony jokes with the voice while continuing his work. He tests the device, making adjustments and monitoring the results on a screen. Satisfied, he steps back and smiles. The scene cuts to Tony's mansion in Malibu, sitting high on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The house is large, open, and filled with technology. Robotic arms move around the workspace, assisting Tony. Tony walks through the house while talking to his computer system. He is preparing to leave for a trip. A woman named Pepper Potts enters the room. She hands Tony his phone and reminds him of his schedule. Tony flirts with her casually while continuing to pack. Pepper helps Tony gather his belongings. Tony moves around the room, distracted and playful, while Pepper tries to keep him organized. She reminds him about an important presentation overseas. Tony listens but jokes and avoids taking things seriously. The scene changes to a press event at a military base. Tony stands at a podium, facing reporters and military officials. He confidently introduces a new weapon system called the Jericho missile. Screens behind him show images of the weapon. Tony begins his presentation with humor, joking with the audience. He activates the missile demonstration remotely. The missile launches and splits into multiple smaller missiles mid-air, striking several targets across a wide area. The targets explode one by one. The audience watches in awe. Military officials applaud. Tony smiles proudly, clearly pleased with the destruction caused by his invention. After the demonstration, Tony walks through the base, surrounded by soldiers and officers. He chats easily with them, enjoying the attention and praise. Later, Tony boards a military transport vehicle to leave the base. Soldiers load equipment while Tony relaxes inside. He sits comfortably as the vehicle begins its journey through the desert. The convoy moves forward, heading into open territory. Tony Stark wakes up slowly in a dark, rocky cave. His vision is blurry. He tries to move but feels pain in his chest and body. He looks down and sees wires connected to a glowing circular device embedded in his chest. Metal fragments are visible beneath his skin. Tony panics and tries to pull the device out. A man suddenly grabs his hands and stops him. The man introduces himself as Insen, a doctor. Insen tells Tony to stay calm and explains that removing the device will kill him. Insen explains that shrapnel from the explosion is moving toward Tony's heart. The device in Tony's chest is powered by a battery and is keeping him alive by stopping the metal fragments from reaching his heart. Insen says he built it using parts Tony had with him. Tony looks around the cave and realizes he is being held captive. Armed men watch from a distance. The cave is filled with weapons, tools, and scraps of metal. Tony realizes he has been kidnapped. Insen tells Tony they are prisoners of a terrorist group called the 10 Rings. He says the group found Tony after the attack and brought him to the cave. Tony asks how long he has been unconscious. Insen tells him it has been several days. Tony looks frightened and confused. He tries to understand his situation. He asks Insen how long the battery in the device will last. Insen says it will keep him alive for a short time, but the power source will need to be replaced. Soon after, armed terrorists enter the cave. They surround Tony and Insen. One of them steps forward and speaks through a translator. The man tells Tony that they know who he is and what he can do. The terrorists show Tony crates filled with weapons. Tony recognizes them immediately. They are Stark Industries weapons. Missiles, guns, and bombs with his company's name are stacked throughout the cave. The leader tells Tony they want him to build the Jericho missile for them. He gives Tony a deadline and warns him that if he refuses or fails, he will die. Tony looks around the cave at the weapons bearing his name. He realizes his technology has been used by the people who captured him. The terrorists leave the cave, locking Tony and Insen inside. Tony sits silently, staring at the weapons and the glowing device in his chest, fully aware that his life now depends on what he does next. Tony Stark and Insen remain inside the cave after the terrorists leave. Tony sits against the rock wall, breathing heavily. He looks down at the glowing device in his chest. Insen watches him quietly. Tony stands and walks slowly around the cave, examining the piles of weapons and scrap metal. He touches a missile and looks closely at the markings. His name is printed clearly on the side. Tony's face shows anger and disbelief. Insen brings Tony food and water. Tony eats slowly, still distracted by his surroundings. He asks Insen about the terrorists. Insen tells him they are dangerous and impatient. Later, the terrorists return and dump boxes of tools and equipment into the cave. They tell Tony to begin working. Tony nods and pretends to cooperate. Tony and Insen begin setting up a workspace. They sort through the metal parts, wires, and machinery. Tony studies the tools carefully, planning something in his mind. The terrorists watch closely as Tony starts drawing diagrams on a piece of scrap metal. He explains that he needs specific materials to build the Jericho missile. The terrorists listen and agree to provide what he requests. Tony secretly changes the designs while pretending to draw missile plans. He works carefully so the terrorists do not notice anything unusual. Insen assists Tony, handing him tools and materials. They speak quietly while working. Tony tells Insen that they are not building a missile. Insen looks surprised but continues helping. The terrorists deliver more equipment to the cave, including heavy machinery and power sources. Tony and Insen continue working day and night. Tony welds metal pieces together, sparks flying in the dark cave. Tony begins assembling a large metal structure. The shape is rough and unfinished, but it starts to resemble armor. Insen watches nervously while keeping an eye on the cave entrance. As time passes, Tony grows weaker from exhaustion but refuses to stop. He works non-stop, determined to finish his project. The scene ends with Tony standing inside the partially built metal suit frame, surrounded by tools and glowing sparks, as the terrorists watch from the shadows. If you want, I can continue with the next 5 minutes. Escape attempt begins. Finish the entire cave escape story. Keep going scene by scene until the suit is complete. Write it in shorter or longer paragraphs. Just say thumbs up. Next 5 minutes, next scenes. Below is only the movie story, continuing with the next 5 minutes of Iron Man 2008. No explanation, no analysis, just the next scenes as they happen. Iron Man 2008. Next 5 minutes. Story only. Tony Stark continues working inside the cave, now fully focused on completing the metal suit. Sparks fly as he welds pieces together. The armor slowly takes shape around him. Insen assists by handing tools and watching the entrance to warn Tony if the terrorists approach. The terrorists return to check Tony's progress. They look at the diagrams and the equipment. Tony calmly tells them he is close to finishing the Jericho missile. The terrorists warn him that time is running out and leave again. Tony climbs fully into the metal suit frame. Insen helps attach heavy plates to Tony's arms and chest. Tony struggles under the weight of the armor, breathing hard. Insen connects wires and power cables to the device in Tony's chest. The suit powers on briefly. Lights flicker. Tony tests the movement of his arms and legs. The suit moves slowly but responds. Tony nods, knowing it works. Suddenly, explosions are heard deeper in the cave. The terrorists realize something is wrong. Alarms are raised. Gunmen rush toward Tony and Insen. Tony tells Insen to activate the system. Insen hesitates but follows Tony's instructions. The suit powers up fully. Tony steps forward as bullets strike the armor. The metal absorbs the gunfire. Tony struggles to walk but moves toward the cave exit. He fires flamethrowers from the suit's arms, forcing the terrorists back. Smoke and fire fill the cave. Tony crushes weapons and walls as he moves forward. More gunmen attack, but the armor protects him. Insen stays behind at the controls, helping Tony from a distance. Tony reaches the cave entrance. He turns and sees Insen collapse, wounded by gunfire. Tony rushes back toward him, but Insen tells Tony to leave. Insen smiles weakly and urges Tony to escape while he still can. Tony hesitates, then turns away. He uses the suit's power to blast his way out of the cave. The cave explodes behind him as Tony escapes into the open desert. Tony Stark runs through the desert wearing the heavy metal suit. Flames and smoke rise behind him as the cave collapses. Gunfire follows him from a distance, but he keeps moving forward. The suit begins to malfunction. Warning lights flash inside the helmet. Tony struggles to control it as he reaches a rocky area outside the cave. The suit's power weakens, and Tony uses the last of its energy to fire into the ground beneath him. The blast launches Tony into the air. He flies upward briefly, then loses control. The suit shuts down midair. Tony crashes hard into the desert sand and rolls across the ground, landing motionless. The suit powers down completely. Tony lies inside, unconscious. Later, Tony wakes up to the sound of helicopters. He looks up and sees U.S. Air Force jets flying overhead. Soldiers surround him carefully. They open the suit and pull Tony out. Tony is loaded onto a helicopter. Inside, he lies on a stretcher, injured and exhausted. Soldiers speak around him as the helicopter lifts off and flies away from the desert. The scene cuts to the United States. Tony arrives at a military hospital. Doctors rush him through hallways on a stretcher. Medical staff work quickly to treat his injuries. Soon after, Tony is escorted into a room filled with reporters and government officials. Cameras flash. Questions are shouted at him from every direction. Tony looks overwhelmed and confused. A military officer hands Tony prepared note cards and tells him to read them exactly. Tony stands at the podium and begins reading from the cards, stating that he was rescued after an accident. Tony stops reading. He looks at the reporters and hesitates. Then he smiles slightly and speaks honestly, saying that he was kidnapped. The room erupts in noise as reporters shout questions. The scene ends as Tony is led away while cameras continue flashing. Tony Stark arrives back at his home in Malibu. The helicopter lands on the platform outside his mansion. Tony steps out slowly, still weak but walking on his own. Pepper Potts rushes toward him. She looks relieved and emotional. Tony smiles at her and assures her he is fine. They walk inside the house together. Inside, Tony's assistant computer system activates and welcomes him home. Tony heads straight to his workshop. Pepper follows him, trying to talk, but Tony is distracted. Tony removes his shirt, revealing the glowing device embedded in his chest. Pepper is shocked when she sees it. Tony asks her to help him remove the old battery from the device. Pepper is nervous and unsure but agrees. Tony lies back while Pepper carefully reaches into the device opening. She removes the small battery and replaces it with a new one. Tony relaxes as the power stabilizes. Afterward, Pepper steps away, shaken by what she has just done. Tony gets up and casually puts on a shirt, acting as if nothing unusual happened. Later, Tony attends a company event at Stark Industries. Reporters, employees, and executives gather in a large hall. Tony stands on stage to address them. Instead of giving the expected speech, Tony speaks honestly. He announces that Stark Industries will no longer manufacture weapons. The crowd reacts with shock and confusion. Tony leaves the stage immediately, ignoring questions and protests. Pepper watches him from the crowd, stunned. The scene ends as executives argue among themselves while Tony walks away. Tony Stark walks away from the company event and returns home. Inside his workshop, he begins working alone. Machines activate around him as he studies the glowing device in his chest. He removes the crude battery and replaces it with a more powerful energy source, which stabilizes the device. Tony starts designing a new suit. He works at computer screens, creating detailed blueprints. Robotic arms move parts into place as he builds metal components. Tony tests motors, joints, and plating, assembling pieces of armor on mechanical frames. He builds a sleek silver suit and steps into it. The suit closes around his body piece by piece. Tony powers it on and begins testing movement inside the workshop. He practices walking, turning, and lifting his arms. Tony tests the suit's flight system. He fires the thrusters and rises off the ground but loses balance and crashes into the workshop wall. Equipment falls and sparks fly. Tony groans but stands up again. He continues testing. During another flight attempt, he shoots straight upward through the ceiling of the workshop, bursting into the open air. He flies over the ocean, gaining speed and altitude. As he rises higher, ice begins to form on the suit. The systems freeze. Tony loses control and falls rapidly from the sky. At the last moment, the suit's safety systems activate, slowing his fall. He crashes into the ocean and sinks briefly before flying back out. Tony returns to his house and lands roughly inside the workshop. The suit shuts down. Tony removes the helmet, smiling despite the damage. Later, Obadiah Stane arrives at Tony's home. He expresses concern about Tony's behavior and the company's future. Tony listens quietly but remains firm. After Obadiah leaves, Tony returns to his workshop and begins improving the suit design, making adjustments for the next version. Tony Stark continues testing and improving his suit in the workshop. He upgrades the flight system, adding stronger thrusters and improved stabilization. Sparks fly and pieces of metal fall as he adjusts the armor. Tony tests the suit's weapons, firing small repulsor blasts at targets he sets up inside the workshop. The blasts punch holes in the walls, and smoke rises from scorched metal. Once satisfied, Tony decides to take the suit outside for a full test. He steps onto the cliff edge of his Malibu mansion. With a deep breath, he powers up the suit and launches into the air. He soars over the ocean, flying high and fast, performing loops and testing maneuverability. The sun reflects off the shiny metal suit, highlighting its sleek design. Tony pushes the thrusters to full power, flying over nearby islands and beaches. He practices firing repulsor blasts in midair, destroying small floating targets. The suit responds perfectly, moving exactly as he commands. Tony laughs joyfully, thrilled by his creation. Suddenly, Tony notices a boat far below, surrounded by gunfire. Pirates are attacking it. Without hesitation, Tony dives down in the suit. He hovers over the attackers and fires a repulsor blast, disabling their weapons. The pirates panic as the suit hovers above them, and Tony swoops down again to knock them unconscious with precise blasts. He secures the hostages and disables the pirate boat's engines. After saving the hostages, Tony flies back to Malibu. He lands on his mansion's cliffside, stepping out of the suit. He removes the helmet, smiling broadly, exhilarated by both the flight and his first real heroics. Pepper enters the room, startled by the suit and Tony's excitement. Tony casually explains the suit's capabilities, clearly proud of his invention. Later, Tony calls Obadiah Stane. He informs him that he is officially retiring from weapons manufacturing and will be moving in a new direction. Obadiah is visibly shocked but tries to maintain composure. The scene ends with Tony staring out over the ocean from his mansion balcony, the sun setting behind him. He holds the chess device in his hand, thinking about the responsibility and potential of his new invention. Tony Stark returns to Stark Industries headquarters to begin addressing the fallout from his announcement about ending weapons manufacturing. He enters the lobby, where employees and executives are murmuring among themselves, visibly confused and concerned. Tony meets with Obadiah Stane, the company's senior executive. Obadiah congratulates Tony on surviving his kidnapping but expresses concern about the company's future. He subtly questions Tony's judgment and warns him that the board may not support his decision to shut down weapons production. Tony listens politely but makes it clear that his decision is final. Meanwhile, Tony walks through the factory floor, observing employees working on weapons. He notices missiles, guns, and other devices labeled Stark Industries being prepared for shipment. Tony looks at them with a mixture of disgust and determination, realizing the destructive consequences of his past work. At the same time, Tony begins quietly gathering materials for his personal project, the full Iron Man suit. In his private workshop at the factory, he works late into the night, assembling metal plates, testing servos, and integrating the chest-powered energy device. He moves quickly and carefully, ensuring the project remains secret. During these nights of work, Tony performs multiple tests on the suit. He checks flight stabilization, weapon systems, and durability. Sparks fly and machinery whirs as he adjusts every detail. Small accidents occur, including minor explosions, but Tony remains focused. The suit is slowly becoming fully functional. One night, Tony tests the suit in the factory. He powers it up and lifts off the ground for a short hover. He fires small repulsor blasts at targets inside the workshop, carefully observing the suit's response. Each test increases his confidence. After completing the evening's work, Tony removes the helmet and sits back. He looks at the glowing chest device, reflecting on the journey from his kidnapping to this point. He smiles, proud of his invention, and begins planning the next steps for its use. The scene ends with Tony standing inside the partially completed suit, surrounded by machinery and glowing lights, ready to take the Iron Man project to the next level. Tony Stark fully completes the Iron Man suit in his private workshop. The armor is now sleek, red and gold, with all systems functional. He powers it on and the suit hums with energy. Tony steps into the suit, tests the movements, and activates the flight thrusters. Sparks fly and machinery whirs as he carefully checks the suit's responsiveness. Once confident, Tony decides to test it outside. He lifts off from the workshop roof, hovering in the air. The suit responds perfectly, stabilizing instantly. Tony flies over Malibu, performing loops and testing maneuverability at higher speeds. He laughs with exhilaration, enjoying his first true flight. Suddenly, Tony notices smoke rising from the ocean. He flies toward it and sees a small boat under attack by modern pirates. The pirates are firing weapons at the boat and its crew. Tony hovers above, assessing the situation. He swoops down and fires precise repulsor blasts at the pirates' guns, disabling them. Sparks and smoke fill the air as the pirates panic. Tony swoops closer, firing at the boat's engine to prevent escape. The pirates are knocked off balance and flee. The hostages on the boat wave in relief. Tony uses the suit to secure the boat and ensure the people are safe. Afterward, he flies back toward the shore, satisfied with his first real act of heroism. Back at his mansion, Tony lands on the cliff edge and removes the helmet. Pepper Potts enters, surprised by the suit and by Tony's accomplishment. Tony casually explains the suit's capabilities, showing pride but keeping it lighthearted. He begins planning further improvements, knowing the suit can do much more than just save people. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane is seen in his office, reviewing Tony's earlier weapons shutdown announcement. He looks concerned and begins plotting, realizing Tony's new direction threatens his control over the company. The scene ends with Tony standing on the mansion balcony, looking out over the ocean at sunset, the Iron Man suit beside him, ready for the next phase of his journey. After the first test flight and rescue of the boat, Tony Stark begins preparing for the official unveiling of his new direction at Stark Industries. He walks through the factory, observing employees as they react to the news that weapons production has stopped. Some are confused, others frustrated, but Tony remains focused on his personal mission. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane meets privately with company executives. He expresses concern about Tony's actions and the future of the company. Stane secretly begins devising plans to take control of Stark Industries, knowing Tony's absence from weapons oversight leaves a power vacuum. He starts ordering the shipment of weapons from Tony's factories to be controlled under his supervision. Back at his mansion, Tony continues improving the Iron Man suit. He tests weapon systems, including repulsor blasts and flamethrowers, firing at targets in the workshop. Sparks and smoke fill the area as Tony pushes the suit to its limits. He steps back, satisfied with the improvements. Tony calls Pepper Potts to brief her on the upgrades. He explains that the suit is now fully functional and capable of flight and combat. Pepper reacts with a mix of concern and admiration. Tony casually jokes, showing his typical humor and confidence, but clearly takes his work seriously. The next morning, Tony publicly addresses the media at Stark Industries. He delivers a speech about no longer manufacturing weapons and taking the company in a new direction. Cameras flash as reporters react with surprise. Tony confidently asserts his decision, ignoring protests from executives and military officials in the audience. Obadiah Stane watches the speech via a monitor. He appears increasingly determined, hinting at future conflict with Tony. The camera lingers on his expression as Tony walks away, smiling slightly, aware that his actions have disrupted the status quo. The scene ends with Tony returning to the mansion workshop, preparing for the next phase of his journey as Iron Man, focused on building and improving the suit for future challenges. Tony Stark, fully equipped in the Iron Man suit, conducts his first real public test. He flies over the city, performing loops, sharp turns, and rapid maneuvers. His movements are precise, and the suit's weapons respond perfectly. Tony laughs with excitement, enjoying the thrill of flight and control. Meanwhile, a small terrorist cell attempts an attack on a nearby convoy carrying weapons. Tony notices smoke and explosions from above. He decides to intervene. Flying toward the scene, he hovers silently over the attackers and assesses the situation. Tony uses the suit's repulsor beams to disable the terrorists' guns and vehicles. Sparks and smoke rise as bullets ricochet harmlessly off the armor. The attackers panic as Tony swoops down, firing targeted blasts to neutralize them without harming civilians. He quickly disables the weapons shipment and secures the area. Afterward, Tony flies back over the city, testing the suit's flight stability at high speed and using the thrusters to hover above rooftops. He lands briefly on a rooftop to inspect the armor, making minor adjustments and checking energy levels. The suit's systems indicate everything is functioning perfectly. Back at his mansion, Tony removes the helmet and walks inside. Pepper Potts expresses concern over the danger he just faced, but Tony brushes it off, excited about the suit's success. He begins planning improvements to make the armor even stronger and more versatile, including enhanced weapons, more powerful thrusters, and a heads-up display for combat scenarios. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane reviews surveillance footage of Tony's public flight and heroics. He grows increasingly worried and envious of Tony's capabilities. Stane begins making secret plans to build his own armored suit, intending to challenge Tony and regain control of Stark Industries. The scene ends with Tony in his workshop at night, surrounded by tools, metal plates, and glowing screens. He studies designs for further upgrades to the Iron Man suit, determined to prepare for any future threats. Tony Stark fully dons the Iron Man suit and decides to confront weapons smugglers publicly for the first time. Flying high above the city streets, he spots a convoy of trucks carrying stolen Stark Industries weapons. The trucks are guarded by armed men. Tony hovers above, observing their movements. He dives down, firing repulsor blasts at the tires of the lead truck. Explosions throw the convoy off balance. The gunmen open fire, but their bullets bounce harmlessly off the armored suit. Tony swoops between the vehicles, disabling their engines and neutralizing weapons without harming the civilians nearby. The convoy begins to scatter. Tony pursues the fleeing trucks, firing carefully to stop them. One truck crashes, and the driver runs away, surrendering. Tony lands briefly on a rooftop to assess the situation and ensure no one else is in danger. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane watches surveillance footage of Tony's actions. He is visibly alarmed and furious. Stane calls his associates, telling them that Tony is becoming a problem and that Stark Industries' future must be controlled. He begins laying the groundwork to secretly build his own suit of armor. Back on the streets, Tony spots the main arms dealer escaping in a helicopter. He takes off quickly, flying toward the helicopter at high speed. Using the suit's thrusters and targeting systems, Tony disables the helicopter's rotors with precise repulsor blasts. The helicopter crashes safely, and the dealer is captured by authorities arriving on the scene. After the confrontation, Tony flies back to his mansion. He lands on the cliffside, removes the helmet, and walks inside. Pepper Potts is waiting, concerned but relieved that he is safe. Tony casually explains that the suit is working perfectly and that he plans to continue using it to stop dangerous arms dealers. The scene ends with Tony in the workshop, inspecting the armor and beginning to plan further upgrades, determined to expand the suit's capabilities for future threats. After Tony's first public action as Iron Man, he returns to Stark Industries. Executives and employees watch surveillance footage of the incident, impressed and anxious about his sudden heroics. Obadiah Stane, standing alone in his office, studies the footage with a grim expression. He realizes Tony's independence and heroics are a direct threat to his own ambitions. Obadiah begins secretly gathering resources to create his own armored suit. He recruits engineers and scientists loyal to him, instructing them to replicate Tony's design while improving firepower and durability. He emphasizes secrecy, ordering them to work under the guise of routine weapons research. Meanwhile, Tony continues to test the Iron Man suit. He flies over the city at high speed, practicing evasive maneuvers and refining targeting. He experiments with the suit's weapon systems, firing repulsor blasts at abandoned buildings and targets on rooftops to perfect precision. Sparks fly and metal dents as the suit absorbs damage during practice. Back at the mansion, Tony analyzes the suit's flight data and weapons performance on multiple screens. He notices areas that need reinforcement and begins redesigning joints, armor plating, and thruster output. He works late into the night, moving between mechanical assembly, welding, and computer programming. Pepper Potts checks in repeatedly, expressing concern over Tony's obsession with testing the suit. Tony reassures her casually but remains fully focused on upgrading and enhancing the armor. He continues adjusting the power source in his chest and running diagnostics to ensure it can sustain long flights and combat situations. Later, Tony receives a call from James Rhodes, Rhodey, who wants to discuss Tony's activities as Iron Man. Tony tests his communication system from the suit and demonstrates some of the new enhancements. Rhodey is impressed and warns Tony to be careful. Tony brushes off the warning, excited about the suit's potential. The scene ends with Tony flying over the ocean at sunset, testing top speed and altitude, while Obadiah Stane watches from Stark Industries, plotting his next moves to challenge Tony's growing influence and control. Tony Stark continues flying in the fully upgraded Iron Man suit. He performs high-speed maneuvers over the ocean, testing flight stability and precision targeting with the repulsor beams. He practices firing at floating targets and abandoned structures, perfecting the suit's capabilities. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane moves forward with his plan. In a private lab at Stark Industries, he oversees engineers building a larger, heavily armored suit. Stane instructs them to increase firepower, add thicker plating, and integrate stronger thrusters. He watches surveillance footage of Tony flying and fighting, noting weaknesses he can exploit in his own design. Back at Malibu, Tony lands on his mansion cliff after a successful flight. He removes the helmet and walks into his workshop. He begins adjusting the suit's joints, upgrading weapon systems, and improving flight control. Sparks fly and tools clatter as Tony works late into the night. Pepper Potts enters to check on him. She expresses concern over Tony pushing himself too hard and warns about the dangers of using the suit publicly. Tony reassures her, smiling, and explains that the suit is fully functional and that he is ready to act against dangerous arms dealers and threats. Tony receives a call from James Rhodes, who commends him on the first public flight and warns about potential threats from the military and criminals who now know the suit exists. Tony demonstrates minor flight maneuvers during the call, impressing Rhodey and showing him the suit's abilities. Later, Tony flies over the city to monitor weapons shipments. He spots a small convoy of trucks carrying illegal Stark Industries weapons, guarded by armed men. Tony swoops down, disables the truck's engines with repulsor blasts, and neutralizes the gunmen. Civilians in the area are unharmed. Tony ensures the weapons are secured and destroyed. The scene ends with Tony flying back toward Malibu at sunset. He hovers above the ocean, adjusting his suit and planning the next upgrades. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane watches him from Stark Industries, growing increasingly determined to challenge Tony and seize control of the company. Tony Stark continues patrolling in the Iron Man suit, monitoring illegal weapons shipments and testing the suit's combat capabilities. He flies over a convoy carrying stolen Stark Industries weapons. The armed guards notice him and open fire, but the bullets bounce harmlessly off the armor. Tony swoops down, firing repulsor blasts to disable the vehicle's engines. Sparks and smoke fill the area as the convoy crashes and the guards flee. After neutralizing the convoy, Tony lands briefly on a nearby rooftop. He surveys the area, ensuring no civilians are harmed and that the weapons are secured. He takes a moment to adjust the suit's thrusters and check the energy output from the chest device, making minor calibrations for precision and stability. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane reviews the surveillance footage of Tony's actions. He grows increasingly frustrated and decides it's time to accelerate his own plans. Stane instructs his engineers to finish building a prototype of his massive, heavily armored suit. He emphasizes maximum firepower, thick plating, and advanced weapons systems capable of challenging Iron Man. Back at Malibu, Tony returns to the mansion. He removes the suit and begins analyzing the collected data from his flight. He works late into the night, improving armor joints, thruster efficiency, and repulsor targeting. Sparks fly as he welds metal and fine-tunes the armor's energy systems. He occasionally pauses to check the glowing chest device embedded in him, ensuring it remains stable. Pepper Potts checks on Tony repeatedly. She is worried about him using the suit in public, but Tony reassures her that the suit is functioning perfectly and that he can handle the responsibility. He demonstrates minor flight movements inside the workshop, testing balance and weapons in a controlled environment. The scene ends with Tony flying over the ocean at night. The suit glows red and gold under the moonlight. Tony hovers at high altitude, looking determined, while Obadiah Stane watches him from Stark Industries, plotting how to confront and ultimately overpower Tony. Tony Stark, in the fully upgraded Iron Man suit, continues patrolling and testing the armor over the city. He spots another illegal weapons convoy being transported. Flying low, He uses the suit's repulsor blasts to disable the truck's engines and neutralize the armed guards. Sparks and smoke fill the streets as the convoy crashes, but civilians are unharmed. Tony quickly secures the area and ensures the weapons are destroyed. Back at Stark Industries, Obadiah Stane monitors surveillance footage of Tony's public actions. He grows increasingly frustrated and envious. Stane convenes a secret meeting with his engineers and instructs them to finalize the construction of his own armored suit. He emphasizes that it must surpass Iron Man in size, firepower, and durability. Meanwhile, Tony returns to Malibu. He lands on the cliffside of his mansion and removes the helmet. Pepper Potts checks on him, worried about the risks of flying and fighting in the suit. Tony reassures her, showing confidence in the armor's performance and explaining that he can now handle real threats. Tony heads into his workshop to continue improvements. He strengthens the armor plating, refines the flight stabilization system, and tests the repulsor weapons. Sparks fly as he welds metal pieces, fine-tunes servos, and adjusts the energy output from the chest-powered arc reactor. He occasionally pauses to ensure the device embedded in his chest is functioning correctly. Later, Tony flies over the ocean at night to test maximum speed and maneuverability. He performs loops, rolls, and rapid ascents, firing at abandoned floating targets. The suit responds flawlessly. Tony smiles, exhilarated, and begins planning further upgrades. Obadiah Stane continues plotting at Stark Industries. He secretly orders weapons and materials from company factories to build his suit. He emphasizes secrecy and speed, ensuring Tony cannot detect his actions. The scene ends with Tony hovering over the ocean under the moonlight, the Iron Man suit glowing red and gold, fully functional and ready for action. Obadiah Stane watches him through surveillance feeds, his expression dark and determined. Tony Stark continues flying in the Iron Man suit over the city, monitoring weapons shipments and testing flight maneuvers. He notices a small group of armed men moving crates marked Stark Industries into a building. Realizing they are terrorists using his weapons, he decides to intervene. Tony hovers outside the building, assessing the situation. He uses the suit's repulsor beams to disable the guards' weapons without harming civilians nearby. The men scatter, dropping crates of illegal arms. Tony lands briefly on a nearby rooftop and ensures the area is safe. The authorities arrive afterward, though unaware of Tony's involvement. Back at Stark Industries, Obadiah Stane watches surveillance footage of Tony in action. He grows increasingly frustrated with Tony's independence and public heroics. Stane secretly accelerates construction of the Ironmonger suit, instructing engineers to enhance its size, strength, and firepower to surpass Iron Man. He emphasizes secrecy and speed, planning to challenge Tony once the suit is operational. Meanwhile, Tony returns to his Malibu mansion. He removes the helmet and inspects the Iron Man armor. Sparks and glowing machinery fill the workshop as he makes minor adjustments, reinforcing joints, enhancing weapon systems, and ensuring the chest-powered arc reactor is fully stabilized. Tony also reviews the targeting system, repulsor energy output, and thruster calibration. Pepper Potts enters, concerned about Tony's obsession with testing the suit. Tony reassures her, joking lightly while explaining that the armor is now fully functional and capable of handling threats like the weapons dealers. He continues working late into the night, fine-tuning the suit and preparing for larger challenges. The scene ends with Tony flying over the ocean at night. The suit glows under the moonlight, and he hovers at high altitude, contemplating the responsibility of using his technology for good. Obadiah Stane, in his private lab, monitors Tony's flights and grows increasingly determined to confront him, completing the final stages of the Ironmonger suit. Obadiah Stane completes construction of his massive Ironmonger suit, a towering armored figure with heavy weapons and reinforced plating. Stane steps into the suit for the first time, testing its strength, firepower, and mobility. The suit's engines roar as Stane lifts off, knocking over equipment in the lab. He is confident the armor will overpower Tony. Meanwhile, Tony Stark monitors his systems at the Malibu mansion. Alerts on his screens indicate unusual activity at Stark Industries. He recognizes the patterns as unauthorized weapons movement and possible sabotage. Tony quickly dons the Iron Man suit and launches into flight, heading toward the facility. As Tony approaches, he sees Ironmonger in the distance, firing powerful energy blasts and destroying equipment in the yard. Stane is testing the armor's weapons and strength, demonstrating that it can dominate conventional attacks. Tony hovers above, observing the suit's capabilities while planning his approach. Tony fires a few repulsor blasts at the Ironmonger suit from a distance. The blasts barely dent the heavy armor, showing Tony that a direct attack will be dangerous. He adjusts his strategy, flying around the massive suit to target weak points. Ironmonger reacts, firing energy blasts and missiles at Tony. The attacks explode near him, throwing him off balance, but the Iron Man suit's thrusters and armor protect him. Tony maneuvers carefully, dodging blasts while returning fire with precision shots to the suit's joints. The first encounter escalates as Tony and Stane exchange attacks over the facility grounds. Sparks fly and explosions rock the area. Workers and engineers hide in the background, watching the armored duel from a safe distance. Tony begins to realize that this battle will require not just firepower, but strategy and agility to overcome Stane's larger, stronger suit. The scene ends with Tony hovering above Ironmonger, preparing to continue the fight, while Stane glares at him through the massive helmet, confident that his superior size and strength will win the battle. The battle between Iron Man and Ironmonger intensifies. Tony maneuvers quickly around Stane's massive suit, dodging energy blasts and missiles fired from the armor. The powerful suit rams into buildings and crushes metal structures, showing its immense strength. Tony narrowly avoids being struck by swinging mechanical arms. Tony identifies weak points in Ironmonger's armor, particularly at the joints and the chest area where the reactor is visible. He fires concentrated repulsor blasts at these vulnerable spots. Stane counters with heavy fire, forcing Tony to retreat temporarily and reassess his strategy. The fight moves across the city. Ironmonger smashes through streets and vehicles, firing weapons at Tony while causing chaos. Civilians flee in panic. Tony uses the suit's thrusters and agility to stay one step ahead, firing strategically to exploit openings without causing unnecessary collateral damage. At one point, Ironmonger grabs Tony midair with one massive hand, slamming him toward a rooftop. Tony struggles to free himself but uses the suit's jet boots to break free, firing a series of precise repulsor blasts to stagger Stane. Sparks and debris fly as the massive suit absorbs heavy hits but shows signs of stress around the joints. Tony then devises a plan to direct Stane away from populated areas. He lures Ironmonger toward the desert outside the city, drawing him into open space where Tony can use full mobility. The chase continues at high speed, with both suits exchanging fire, dodging obstacles, and testing the limits of their technology. The scene ends with Tony hovering above Ironmonger in the desert, preparing for a final assault. He focuses on exploiting the weak points in the suit's armor while Stane powers up weapons for a massive attack. Tony Stark and Obadiah Stane in the Ironmonger suit face off in the desert outside the city. The open terrain gives Tony room to use the suit's full speed and maneuverability. Ironmonger fires powerful energy blasts and missiles, destroying boulders and creating huge craters. Tony dodges skillfully, firing precise repulsor blasts at the massive armor. Tony notices the arc reactor on Stane's chest glowing brightly, similar to his own. He realizes that hitting the reactor is the key to defeating the larger suit. Tony maneuvers above Ironmonger, using the thrusters to stay out of reach while carefully lining up a shot at the reactor. Stane attacks aggressively, swinging mechanical arms and firing energy blasts at Tony. Tony narrowly avoids destruction, using the suit's agility to zip around the towering Ironmonger. He fires several blasts at the joints, slowing Stane down and causing the suit to stagger. Tony then flies beneath Ironmonger, evading the sweeping arms, and launches a full-power repulsor blast directly at Stane's chest reactor. The impact overloads the reactor, causing sparks, smoke, and internal explosions inside the armor. Ironmonger stumbles backward, heavily damaged. Stane, weakened and struggling to maintain control of the suit, tries one last attack. Tony circles and fires again, hitting the reactor directly. The armor begins to collapse under its own energy overload. Tony flies back and watches as the Ironmonger's suit explodes in a massive blast, leaving Stain defeated inside. Tony hovers briefly, ensuring no civilians are endangered. He then lands safely in the desert, removing the helmet. Exhausted but triumphant, Tony reflects on the fight and the responsibility of wielding such powerful technology. The scene ends with emergency responders arriving at the desert site, surveying the wreckage. Tony leaves quietly, already planning improvements to the Iron Man suit and thinking about the future threats he may face. After defeating Obadiah Stane, Tony Stark returns to Malibu. He lands the Iron Man's suit on the cliffside near his mansion and walks inside, exhausted but triumphant. Pepper Potts is waiting and rushes to check on him. Tony reassures her, smiling, and removes the helmet. Pepper expresses relief that he survived and admiration for what he accomplished. Tony sits in the workshop and reviews the damaged Ironmonger armor via video and photos. He studies its weaknesses, thinking about improvements to the Iron Man suit. He acknowledges that technology is powerful and dangerous and reflects on the responsibility of using it wisely. Meanwhile, at Stark Industries, the board and employees react to the news of Tony's actions. Executives, previously skeptical of his weapons shutdown, are impressed by his heroics and the defeat of Stain. Obadiah's control and influence over the company are gone. Tony attends a press conference to address the public. He steps up to the podium, facing reporters and cameras. After a brief speech about responsibility, innovation, and protecting people, Tony reveals publicly, "I am Iron Man." The room erupts with shock and applause. Tony smiles confidently, embracing his new identity. Pepper watches from the side, proud but still slightly concerned about the attention Tony's revelation will bring. James Rhodes is also present, nodding in approval at Tony's courage and honesty. The scene transitions to Tony returning to his workshop at night, tinkering with the suit. Sparks fly as he works on new upgrades. He is determined to continue improving the armor for the future, fully aware that being Iron Man is now both his duty and his life. The camera pans to the glowing arc reactor in Tony's chest, symbolizing his power, ingenuity, and responsibility. The screen fades, signaling the end of the main story. After the main story concludes, the screen fades to black. Inside a dimly lit room, Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., is sitting behind a desk. He calls someone on a secure line. Fury speaks about Tony Stark, referring to him as a potential asset for a larger initiative. He explains that Stark is not just a weapons manufacturer but someone with unique capabilities that could be valuable for global protection. Fury then introduces the concept of the Avengers Initiative, telling the person on the line that Tony Stark could be recruited for a team of extraordinary individuals to handle threats beyond normal means. The scene ends with Fury looking directly at the camera, hinting at the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the assembly of heroes that will become the Avengers. The screen cuts to black, leaving the audience with the promise of more superhero stories to come.